Okay. Just confirm me, am I audible to you? The PPT is visible. Everything is perfect, right? Quick. Answer me quick. Good morning. Am I audible to you? Okay, fine. Thank you. Then we'll start our today's class. See, in yesterday we have discussed about origin of life and some of the modern concepts and some of the theories related to evolution. In today's class, we are going to extend some of our preparation. Okay, see, what is isolation, what is speciation, and what is natural selection. So this is what we are going to discuss today. And what is isolation? Here, isolation means separation of population of species, preventing the gene flow between them. So we have studied that gene flow will be the basic thing. It leads to the genetic diversity. Just opposite to that phenomenon, we have a concept of isolation, because here there will be no mixing of two different groups of populations. Okay, here there will be the barrier, there will be some barrier which separates two different species from interbreeding, right? That is what an isolation is. And we have a different types of barrier leads to an isolation. And one is geographical isolation, ecological isolation, temporal isolation, and behavioral isolation. Okay, now what is geographical isolation? There will be a certain geographical phenomenon like mountains and rivers. This act as a barrier, this act as a physical barrier which separates a two different set of people or two different set of species from mixing. Okay, this results in the separation, so that will be the geographical barrier. And what is ecological barrier? Ecological barrier means that two different species have a difference in their habitat, which means what? They have a different area of living. One species prefer to live in one area, and another group of species will prefer to live in different areas. So the habitat will be vary, and their ecological niche. What is niche? See, habitat is somewhat related to a place of living. Okay, one's place of living is said to be as a habitat, but ecological niche is somewhat related to a functional role of a particular organisms in that particular habitat. Okay, along with the place of living, this ecological niche is related to a functional role of a particular species. That is what an ecological niche is. So you should know that if a particular species have a different habitat or ecological niche, and that will be act as an ecological barrier. So as it have a different habitat and different ecological niche, definitely they can't interbreed. Okay, and that is what an isolation is. Ecological isolation. Now, what is temporal isolation? See, if two different species, if it has to mix, definitely the point of having a mixing it was to breed. Okay, so if the time for these breeding process, if it is vary from one species to another species, that will be called as the temporal isolation. Okay, if this particular species have a breeding time in a winter, and if this prefer to breed in a summertime, so this will be the temporal isolation, and this results in the separation of a species. Okay, now behavioral isolation. There will be a differences in behavior or mate preference. Okay, there will be a in choosing the mate into which particular they are going to mate. So their choosing behavior will getting different from one species to the another species. So this is what is isolation is. These are all the types of isolation, and what is the result of this particular isolation, because there will be no gene flow. Okay, as it is separate as this results in the separation of the population, definitely there will be no intermixing of these two genes, two different genes. So it prevents the gene flow. So as it prevents the gene flow, definitely the genetic divergence is getting uh, decreases. So can this leads to speciation if isolation is strong and persistent. See, this leads to the genetic divergence between the populations as it is a small population. So as I said before, in small population, there will be the genetic drift. Okay, and this leads to the genetic divergence between the population. This leads to a speciation if this isolation is strong and persistent. If there is no gene flow between two different population, it leads to the speciation. Okay, this is what an isolation is. Now, what is speciation? We know that speciation is an evolutionary process by which a new biological species is getting arised. Okay, simply formation of a new species. That is what a new speciation is. Now, there will be a different types of a speciation. One is allopatric speciation. In allopatric speciation, here there will be a geographical isolation. See, this will be the species, two different species, two different geographical location, but there will be a mixing of these two particular species, and it results in the formation of a new species, and that is called as the allopatric speciation. And in case of sympatric speciation, here there will be no geographic isolation, but there will be other factors which influencing this particular speciation. For example, see, there will be in a same locality, two different species are there, and they are going to interbreed with each other and gives rise to a new species. Okay, this is what a sympatric speciation is. Now, what is parapatric? Here there will be a partial geographical isolation with limited gene flow. We can draw like this. Okay, there will be a partial geographical isolation with limited gene flow. As it have only smaller common area, there will be only a limited gene flow can be seen in this particular type of speciation. That is what a parapatric speciation is. Now, what is the end product for this as a result of this particular speciation? Formation of a new species. Here, population becomes reproductively isolated, no longer interbreed. It results in the genetic and phenotypic differences over time. So as a result, we are going to get a newer species. Okay. Now, what is natural selection? Natural selection, we know that whatever be the organism is, and if it have any characteristic advantages to withstand any abnormal environment, to withstand any abnormal climatic conditions, and to withstand the predators, and whatever be the external factor it is, whether it is a positive factor or it will be a negative factor, if that particular organism has the capacity to withstand what are all the negative impacts seen in the external environment, only that particular environment has the capacity to survive, and they only have the capacity to transfer their gene to the next generation. That is what a natural selection is. Nature is getting selected who want to survive and who will be the fittest organisms. Okay, that is what a concept of natural selection. Now, what are all the types of natural selection? Stabilizing selection. So this will be an important area where the question can be frequently arise. Okay, stabilizing selection, directional selection, disruptive selection. Here, so you should know that whatever be the extreme characteristics will be lost. The extreme characters will be lost. Only the stable character, only the intermediate phenotypes will be. See, for example, a larger organisms will be there in the same species. For example, we can say larger squirrel. Okay, larger squirrel will be there and smaller squirrel will be there. So it is very small, it is very large. So these are all the extreme characteristic features in the same species, but all the extreme characters is getting lost in this particular selection. Only the medium is going to survive. That is what a stabilizing selection is. So it maintains intermediate phenotypes, not the extreme phenotype. So this is what you have to keep in mind. Now, directional selection favors phenotypes at one extreme, which means what? One will be tall, one will be small, and another one is intermediate. So the intermediate is getting lost here, and here we have two extremes. In these two extremes, one of the extreme is going to fit for this particular selection. That is what a directional selection is. Okay, and disruptive selection, it favors extreme phenotypes over the intermediates. As the same thing here, they are going to favor extreme phenotypes. Okay, these two extreme phenotypes. This is what a disruptive selection is. Okay, here, what will be the end product? What will be the outcome of this natural selection? Here, the population is become best suited to their environment, can lead to divergence of traits, speciation, and biological diversity. So, as a result of this natural selection, we have a diversity of the organisms. Okay, diversity of different characters, because one of the other way, in each and every climatic conditions, one has to adapt to that particular character, that particular environment. So obviously, definitely there will be any some sort of change in the genetic level. As a result, they impact on the morphological features. So that will be an advantageous trait acquired by that particular organisms, leads to the divergence of the organisms. Okay, this is what a type of natural selection is, and their an outcome. Okay, and also you should know that the stabilizing selection, directional selection, and disruptive selections graph. Okay, so let me draw you the graph. So the question can also be arise from the graph also. So whenever you find any graphs, you should not, you have to give a special importance to the graph. See, in stabilizing selection, as I said before, only the intermediate characters is going to select, adopt by that particular organism. So we can draw like this. Which means what? All the extreme characters are not getting selected by in this selection. Only the intermediate characters are going to survive here. Okay. Now, in case of a directional selection here, either of the extreme characters is going to extreme characters is going to adopt by this particular directional selection. See, for example, we can draw like this. Only the extreme character, one of the extreme character is going to survive here. And in case of a disruptive selection, we can draw like this. Okay, this is what a disruptive selection is. Okay, so this graph plays an important role when it comes to the question. So kindly make a note of it. This will be the stabilizing selection. See, in this directional selection, we can also either this extreme character is going to select, or this character, and the intermediate characters is lost in this particular directional selection. And in case of disruptive selection, the extreme characters is going to be selected by the environment. Okay, now that's all about the selectionists. Now, Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Hardy-Weinberg law, or the equilibrium, describes the genetic equilibrium that occurs in a population when certain conditions are met. Which means what? When under certain favorable conditions, the this law suggests the genetic equilibrium occurs in a population. Okay, in a population, what will be the genetic equilibrium under certain conditions? That is what Hardy-Weinberg law is. See, then what are all the conditions? The conditions are a larger population size. Okay, large population size. Here there will be no mutation affecting the gene pool. See, these conditions are very, very, very rare to occur in a in reality. Okay, but these conditions can be maintained in the laboratory to calculate some of the calculations to the statistical methods to do some of the experiments. These conditions are okay, but these conditions are not going to happen in the reality. So this is what Hardy-Weinberg law is. So what are all the conditions? Are large population size, no mutation. See, you just think about the reality. Is there any possibility there will be no point of having any mutation? It is extremely rare. If there is no mutation in the environment, we can't find the people. From the monkey, some of the mutation has been happened. Only then Homo sapiens is come into a picture. If the mutation is not happen, how all these evolution is going to take place? So this mutation, no mutation, is somewhat it is not an idealistic feature, but this can be done only in the laboratory to do some of the experiments. Okay, only in the lab. And also no migration. If there is no migration, definitely there will be no gene flow in or out of the population. Random mating. So here, random mating. No sexual selection, mating preferences. See, whatever be the organism is, even if we take a bird, if a male build a nest very correctly, very strongly, only then the female will choose that particular male and they live together. Okay, and what here they have said is random mating. There will be no preference of mating. Just like that, it go and breed and gives rise to an next generation. This is what a random mating is. No natural selection acting on alleles. Just now we have studied how natural selection impacted the environment and what are all the importance of natural selection. But here the conditions under the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium will be the no natural selection. Okay, so this is what a condition on the Hardy-Weinberg law. So you have to note all these conditions without fail. Now, what are all the equations? So p square plus 2, we can say like this, p plus q whole square is equal to 1. This will be the equation of the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. See, and p square will be the dominant, homozygous dominant, q square will be the homozygous recessive, and 2pq will be the heterozygous. Right? This is how you have to understand this equation. Now, see here they have give us p square 2p square. See, so this will be the frequency of the homozygous dominant genotype. So these are all the equations I'll explain you later, because only when solving the questions you come to know. Okay, if I say now, you'll tend to confuse. So we'll skip that equation part. Okay, now population genetics. In case of population genetics, it will be related to the study of genetic variation within a population. Okay, how this variation changes over time. It explores how allele frequencies and genotypic disturbances are maintained and evolved within the population. Within a population, how the allele frequencies has been happened, how the genotype are getting disturbed and are maintained. Everything will be analyzing a molecular level. That will be calling us the population genetics. Now, what are all the concepts are very important when you read the population genetics? Gene pool, allele frequency, and genotype frequency. So these are all the terminologies you have to know. What is gene pool? The total collection of genes and their alleles. See, we are collecting the genes and we are also collecting the different form of a gene, that is alleles in a population. The total collection of these genes and their alleles is called as the gene pool. Now, what is allele frequency? The proportion of a particular allele in a population's gene pool. See, if a father have a certain character, what will be the ratio these character can pass to the different generation, and what will be the ratio this character will impact the entire generation. So the proportion of the particular allele, for how many percentage, how much of amount these character is getting affected almost all the population. That is what an allelic frequency. Okay. Now, what is genotype frequency? Here, the proportion of individuals with a particular genotype in a population. This particular genotype will be seen in certain group of a people, and the calculation of these genotype frequency is called as the genotypic frequency. Now, what are all the things will impact this population genetic, will impact this allelic frequency, genotype frequency, and gene pool? One will be obviously the mutation. See, this mutation is which is the one introduces the new genetic variation into a population, because there will be some changes in the DNA. Only then it will impact in the morphological character, physiological character, and behavioral character. So mutation plays an important role. It leads to the variation. Natural selection. Natural selection is what it is. We know that only the organisms with advantageous traits can survive. Only the fittest organisms will survive. Genetic drift. Here also, same thing like Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Random changes in the allelic frequencies due to chance events more pronounced in a small population. In the smaller population, there will be how many times the allele is getting repeated, random changes in the allele frequencies, how the alleles is getting changed, how often it is changing. That is what a genetic drift is. Okay. Now, what are all the factors affecting the variation? See, if the mutation rate is higher, then the variation is also getting higher. Okay. So the first and foremost thing which affecting the variation will be the rate of mutation, rate at which the new mutation occurs and enter the gene pool. If the mutation occurs very fastly, then the variation is also getting faster. Now, gene flow. If the movement of alleles between the populations through the migration. See, if the migration is higher, definitely the gene flow is also getting higher and the variation is also higher. Okay. Now, no random mating. The female or male has to breed with sexual selection, with sexual preferences. Okay, that made preferences. Okay, preference of certain phenotypes affecting the genotypic frequencies. So this non-random mating will be affecting the variation. Okay. See, if preferences of certain phenotypes. See, some female organism will prefer to mate with a male if it have a certain characteristic features. So that will be the non-random mating. Random mating means just like that it go and breed with a male, and the only motive of that particular individual to give rise to a next individual, to gives rise to a new generation. Okay, that is what a random mating. Here, this non-random mating, see here that female is going to select the male only if they have a certain characteristic advantages. Okay, and that will affecting the genotypic frequencies. Okay, so once again, the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium is also an impact in the, it is also have an important area in the population genetics. It describes the equilibrium of allele and genotype frequencies in an idealized population. And what is idealized population means? If it have these conditions, see, if it have these conditions, that is what an ideal condition is. Only on this ideal condition, this Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium is getting applicable. Okay, under certain conditions, and you have to make a note of it. What are all the conditions? Okay, now what are all the applications? What are all the uses when we study about the population genetics? Medical genetics, there will be an impact in the medical genetics to cure some sort of diseases. Evolutionary biology, how one population is getting evolved from the ancestors. Conservation biology, how regarding the genetic diversity. Forensic genetics, identifying individual using DNA profile. So these are all the applications we can get from the population genetics. And what are all the techniques used in this particular research? Genetic markers, population sampling, and statistical analysis. So these are all the things involved here. So that's all about the speciation, isolation, and natural selection and Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. On only thing left over part from the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium will be the sum. Okay. So we'll leave that and come back to the question. What type of isolation occurs when population are separated by physical barriers such as mountains or rivers? Very good. If it is a physical barrier, definitely that will be the geographical isolation. This leads to genetic divergence and potentially speciation. Okay. Now, which of the following is not a mechanism of reproductive isolation? Not a mechanism of reproductive isolation. That will be the genetic drift, because speciation is an reproductive isolation. Okay, this allopatric and sympatric are the mechanisms of the reproductive isolation involving geographic and non-geographic factors. Behavioral isolation, see, behavioral and genetic is also going to affect the reproductive isolation, but indirectly. In natural selection, which type favors extreme phenotypes over intermediate ones? See, whenever you have caught up with this type of question, just draw the diagram, that is graph, okay, which I have been draw today. See, this will be favorable for intermediate, and this will be for the favorable graph for the extreme, and this will be for both the extremes. Okay, and you have to choose favors extreme phenotypes over the intermediate one. So this graph is not applicable and this graph is not applicable. Favors extreme phenotypes over the intermediate. So what will be the graph? That will be the directional selection. Okay, so if it supports both the extreme, then it will be the disruptive selection. If it favors the intermediate characters, that will be stabilizing selection. But in the directional selection, it favors the one of the extreme over the intermediates. Okay, now what condition must be met for a population to be in a Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium? Is there any mutation happens in the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium? Is that will be the ideal condition for Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium? Just tell me, there will be a high mutation rate or there will be no mutation in the ideal condition of Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. There will be no mutation. Whether there will be the migration or not. Whether there will be the migration or not. There will be no migration. As a result of no migration, there will be no gene flow. Okay, whether that will be the A larger population size or smaller population size? That will be a larger population size. Okay, so only condition will satisfy the ideal condition for Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium will be the uh, random mating, right? What term describes the evolutionary process by which new species arise? That will be the speciation. Okay, only through this a new species is getting arise. This is called as the speciation. Okay, which of the following is an example for pre-zygotic reproductive isolation? I think everybody is facing a struggle here. What is pre-zygotic isolation and post-zygotic isolation? See, you should know the terminologies here. Pre-zygotic isolation, here there will be the pre-zygotic, which means what? Here there will be no point of, no process of zygote has been completed. The zygote is not formed here and everything will be happened before the formation of the zygote. Post-zygotic when the condition means, which means what? The isolation, the barriers or the barriers that prevent the fertilization. Okay, barriers which prevent the fertilization is called as the pre-zygotic barriers, and post-zygotic barriers means after the formation of zygote, what are all the barriers faced by the embryo? As a result, this embryo is die. That is what post-zygotic isolation. Okay, now for pre-zygotic isolation, what are all the factors affecting the pre-zygotic isolation? So that is what a question here. So but before that, you should know what is hybrid breakdown and hybrid sterility. Hybrid breakdown is somewhat it is a failure. Okay, when see, this will be a one organism, this will be a different species. These are all the two different species. They are going to give rise to a new individual. This new individual is said to be as a hybrid, right? Because will be the intermixing of two different characteristic features. So this will be the hybrid. In forming this hybrid, they are facing a failure. This is what a hybrid breakdown. Okay, there will be no compatibility between these two species. Now, what is hybrid sterility here? When this hybrid sterility is somewhat this sterile, they are going to produce a sterile progeny. Okay, the hybrid is sterile here. So, if it is a sterile and if it is a breakdown, definitely that will be the barrier. But here they are asking what is pre-zygotic barrier, and that will be ecological isolation here. This hybrid sterility, hybrid breakdown, that will be the post-zygotic. Why? Because they have been produced the progeny. See, if it produces that, definitely what? The fertilization has been taken place. Okay, so that will be hybrid sterility, hybrid breakdown. Anyhow, the zygote has been formed here. Okay, but in case of an ecological isolation, it is an isolation. There will be the separation of individuals so that there will be no mating has been happened there. So that is what a pre-zygotic. Here the zygote is not even formed here. That is what a pre-zygotic isolation is. I hope everybody clear, right? Okay, fine. Now, what role does genetic drift place in small population? Genetic drift in a smaller population, whether they are going to increase a diversity or decrease a diversity, if you listen to the class correctly, you can answer the question. That will be decreasing the genetic diversity. See, it will be more pronounced in the smaller population, and there will be leads to the random change in the allele frequencies over time. Okay, so they potentially reduces the genetic diversity through the loss of alleles. Okay, in a smaller population, they have been a random mating between all the individuals, okay, for a longer period of time. Okay, in a smaller population, in a random changes, definitely there will be a loss of genetic diversity. Okay, which of the following statements about natural selection is true? So you have to know that. Okay, yeah, just answer this question. I'll say that. And that will be, it acts on the heritable traits and that affect the survival and the reproduction. Okay, this will be your answer. See, what are all the things which decreases the genetic diversity? You should know that inbreeding, genetic drift, okay, and smaller population size. Always this restricted the gene flow. Okay, if the gene flow is getting restricted, definitely there will be no diversity of genes can be seen in that particular environment. Okay, so you have to know that. Okay, what is the term for the total collection of genes and their alleles in a population? That will be obviously the gene pool. Okay, so for tomorrow, we are going to solve some of the questions from Hardy-Weinberg law, and we are going to discuss the evolution of man, geographical realms of the world. I hope from tomorrow, sorry, by tomorrow, we can finish this evolution part and we'll move to developmental biology. So if you have any doubts, you can ask me now. That's all for today's class. And this PPT have some more questions, and these questions have a lot of problems. We'll solve tomorrow. Okay, don't worry. And if you have any doubts, you can ask me now.